3.5 miles beneath the Indian Ocean. Something impossible has just been confirmed. For 82 years, the USS Edsall fought a battle that no one witnessed. Now, for the first time, we're seeing what happened when a single destroyer refused to surrender, and what remains of the men who never came home. The sonar had hinted at something, a geometric shadow where there should be nothing but sediment and stone. The descent takes hours. The water temperature drops to just above freezing. Pressure climbs to levels. The ROV's lights are the first illumination this section of seafloor has seen since the ship itself carried them down in 1942. And then the lights hit metal, not scattered debris, an upright destroyer, intact, resting as if it had been placed there deliberately by something other than war. The bow sits slightly elevated. The superstructure, though encrusted with decades of marine growth and oxidation, retains its wartime geometry. Gun mounts are visible, still trained skyward in their last firing positions, suggesting catastrophic flooding in the aft compartments. But the vessel did not break apart on impact with the seafloor. It sank whole. The imaging is careful, methodical. The ROV makes multiple passes, capturing footage from different angles. Within weeks, the data is analyzed by naval historians and maritime archaeologists, working in coordination with the U.S. Navy's Naval History and Heritage Command and the Royal Australian Navy, cross-referenced against archival blueprints of Clemson-class destroyers, compared to known loss coordinates from declassified Japanese and Allied records. The verification is absolute. This is DD-219, the USS Edsall, a Clemson-class destroyer that vanished on March 1, 1942, taking everyone aboard with it into a theater of war the world had already begun to forget. The formal announcement came in November 2024. Press releases were issued. Families were notified. The discovery made headlines briefly, then faded as the news cycle moved on. But for those who study naval history, for those who lost family in the early Pacific campaigns, for those who understand what it means to find a ship that has been missing for over 8 decades, the discovery was seismic. Because the Edsall was not just lost, it was erased. No survivors returned to tell the story. No wreckage was ever spotted. The circumstances of its sinking were reconstructed entirely from enemy records, reports filed by the same forces that destroyed it. Until now, the Edsall existed only in documents and fading memories. The discovery was not accidental. It was the result of years of archival research, sonar mapping expeditions funded by naval heritage organizations, and painstaking cross-referencing of Japanese naval logs with Allied operational records. Our researchers had narrowed the search area to a corridor south of Christmas Island, far from commercial shipping lanes, far from any landmark. Still, finding a single 314-foot vessel in the vast expanse of the Indian Ocean is like finding a needle in a warehouse full of haystacks, in the dark, with your eyes closed. But they found it. The coordinates remain classified to this day. The site is protected under sovereign immunity as U.S. government property and designated as a war grave under federal and international law. No salvage operations are authorized, no tourism, no unauthorized dives. The location is restricted because this is not a wreck in the conventional sense. It is a mass grave, a monument, a place where men met their end and have rested undisturbed ever since. And now, for the first time, we know exactly where that place is transmitted. A decision made. A task force was diverted to intercept. What followed was not a battle in any traditional sense. It was an execution, or at least, it should have been. The Japanese force converged from multiple directions. The battleships Hiei and Kirishima, each displacing over 30,000 tons, and armed with 14-inch main batteries, capable of hurling shells the weight of a small car over 20 miles. The heavy cruisers Tone and Chikuma added 8-inch guns to the barrage. Carrier-based dive bombers provided air support. In total, over a dozen warships closed on a single target. The Edsall, by comparison, weighed just 1,190 tons fully loaded. Its main armament consisted of 4 4-inch guns, weapons designed for anti-aircraft defense and engaging other destroyers, not battleships. It had no armor worth mentioning, no speed advantage, no escape route. The outcome was never in question, but the duration was. The Japanese battleships opened fire at long range, well within effective range for their fire control systems. The first salvos obscuring visual targeting. It exploited shell splashes, using the water columns thrown up by near misses to mask its movements before the next salvo could be corrected. Japanese gunners, trained to engage targets moving in formation at predictable speeds, found themselves unable to land hits. Salvo after salvo missed. Shells fell short, overshot, landed hundreds of yards off target. Fire control officers adjusted. Spotters called corrections. The battleships closed range. Still, the Edsall danced. From the Japanese perspective, captured in post-war interrogations and operational logs, the small destroyer moved like a mouse, erratic, unpredictable, impossibly nimble for a ship of its size and age. They called it Nezumi, the dancing mouse, not out of admiration, out of frustration. For over an hour, the Edsall evaded destruction. Japanese records indicate that well over 1,000 shells were fired from the combined task force. The hit firing from long range, sections of the hull plating bowed inward from shell impacts, craters, where armor-piercing rounds struck at oblique angles, penetrating thin destroyer plating and detonating inside. Each crater is a record of violence, of energy released in milliseconds, of compartments flooded, and men killed in darkness and chaos, but also evidence of resilience, because despite the damage, the hull remained intact. The ship did not break apart under fire. It stayed together long enough for the crew to fight back, to keep the engines running, to maintain some semblance of control until the very end. There are no human remains visible in the footage. In the deep waters of the Indian Ocean, in electrochemical reactions and bacterial action, but the ship itself has become the artifact. Each dent, each scorch mark, each twisted section of railing is a record of individual decisions made under unimaginable pressure. Decisions to stay at a post when abandoning it would have been understandable. Decisions to keep fighting when fighting was hopeless. Decisions to follow orders when those orders led only to death. Among those aboard, Lieutenant Joshua James Nix, commanding officer, age 36. Married, father of 2. A career officer who had served with distinction in the Asiatic Fleet for years. He knew the water, firing at targets his shells could never seriously damage. Returning fire because that was what you did. That was discipline. That was duty. Radio Man Second Class Kenneth R. Wilbur, who may have transmitted final messages that were never received, either because the radio equipment was damaged or because there was no one close enough to hear. Ensign John W. Ralston, the youngest officer aboard, age 22. A recent Naval Academy graduate on his first combat deployment. He had been at sea for less than 6 months. These are not abstractions. These were men with families, with lives before the war, with plans for lives after. Men who wrote letters home that their families still keep. Men whose photographs sit in frames on mantels, aging in sunlight while the subjects remain forever young. And now, the wreck itself is the only physical evidence that they ever existed. One researcher, reviewing the ROV footage frame by frame, noted the position of a life raft still secured to its davit on the port side, never launched. Either there was no time, or the order to abandon ship was never given, or the crew chose not to abandon while there was still a chance to fight. The families who learned of the discovery in November 2024 were not given coordinates. They were not offered artifacts or relics. What they were given, some for the first time in their lives, was confirmation. Their grandfathers, great-uncles, distant relatives whose deaths had been abstract for generations, now had a location, a resting place, a set of coordinates that, while classified, existed in reality rather than speculation. For some descendants, that was no names, no camp assignments, no repatriation after the war. The fate of anyone who may have survived the sinking remains unknown. We may never know with certainty. The wreck itself offers no evidence either way. There are no life rafts visible in the debris field, but that doesn't mean none were launched. They could have drifted away, sunk separately, or disintegrated decades ago. There are no remains, but in those conditions, there wouldn't be. What the wreck does offer is evidence of an engagement that defies easy explanation. Modern naval analysts, reviewing the Japanese logs and comparing them to the physical condition of the wreck, struggle to understand how the Edsall survived for over an hour against overwhelming firepower. Dr. E. Frank Chadwick, a naval historian specializing in World War II ship-to-ship combat, has noted that the evasive patterns described in Japanese accounts suggest either extraordinary seamanship or unintentional damage that paradoxically improves control, which assumes straight line or zigzag movement. In other words, The ship may have survived longer because it was damaged. Another theory, that Lieutenant Nix deliberately adopted chaotic maneuvers, varying speed and heading at random intervals to confuse Japanese range finding. Clemson-class destroyers were known for being highly maneuverable at speed. If Nix pushed the engines to maximum and threw the ship into violent evasive patterns, he could have exploited the time lag between Japanese salvos, the seconds it took for gunners to reload, recalculate range, and fire again. Both theories fit the that has not lifted in 82 years. And in that darkness, the men of the Edsall remain, still serving, still waiting, still part of a story that we are only now beginning to understand. The deep remembers what we forget, and some truths wait in the dark until we're ready to see them.